Hello everyone, and welcome back to Sleepless Campfire. Tonight, we travel into the forgotten backroads of Appalachia places, where the mountains hold secrets and the mists carry whispers that refuse to die. Across these ancient hills, hollows, and isolated communities are accounts drawn from witness reports, police files, and archived broadcasts. Each one verified, recorded, and retold in their own words. The Appalachian Mountains stretch from Alabama to Canada, containing some of the oldest forests in North America. These lands have witnessed centuries of human settlement, tragedy, and mystery. Within their depths lie stories that challenge our understanding of the natural world. The region's unique geography, steep valleys, dense forests, and isolated communities has created a perfect environment for strange occurrences to unfold away from prying eyes. What follows are 8 accounts that have been thoroughly investigated, yet remain unexplained. Now, let us begin with our first story. 1. It was late October of 2012 when James Mitchell, a 34-year-old geologist from Pittsburgh, decided to spend his weekend hiking in Blackwood Forest. The area, spanning over 87,000 acres across the border of West Virginia and Kentucky, was known for its rugged beauty and challenging trails. James was an experienced outdoorsman, having spent years exploring various terrains across the country. This particular trip was meant to be a final escape before the harsh Appalachian winter set in. The forest welcomed him with the familiar scent of damp earth and decaying leaves. The morning mist clung to the ancient oaks and poplars like ghostly fingers, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere. James checked his GPS device, noting the coordinates of his planned route, a 3-day loop that would take him through some of the most remote sections of the forest. His gear was professional grade, his provisions carefully calculated. He had informed his sister of his itinerary, promising to call her upon his return on Monday evening. As he ventured deeper into the woods that first day, the silence grew heavier. The usual sounds of wildlife seemed muted, almost absent. James noted this oddity in his journal, writing at 2:17 p.m. The forest is unusually quiet today. Haven't seen or heard a single squirrel or bird for the past hour. He continued his trek, setting up camp near a small creek as dusk approached. The temperature dropped rapidly, and James zipped his tent tightly against the encroaching cold. The first anomaly appeared around 9:30 p.m. James was reviewing his geological samples when he heard a faint humming sound that seemed to come from all directions at once. It wasn't mechanical like a generator or vehicle, nor was it organic like an insect or animal. The sound was constant, almost musical in its quality, yet entirely unfamiliar. He stepped outside his tent, scanning the darkness with his high-powered flashlight. The beam cut through the thick forest, revealing nothing but trees and shadows. The humming continued for approximately 20 minutes before gradually fading into silence. The following morning, James woke to find something strange near his campsite. Several stones, each roughly the size of a fist, were arranged in a perfect circle around his tent. He hadn't noticed them the previous night when setting up camp. The stones were smooth river rocks, yet there was no river nearby for at least 2 miles. More disturbingly, there were no footprints in the soft earth around the stones, as if they had simply materialized there overnight. James documented the arrangement with his camera, feeling a growing unease that he couldn't quite explain. He packed up his camp and continued his journey, but the forest's silence had become oppressive. The absence of wildlife was now deeply unsettling. The entry, time-stamped at 12:43 p.m., reads, "I don't understand what's happening. I feel compelled to walk in this direction, though I know it's taking me off course. The humming has returned, stronger this time. A Search and rescue teams were deployed when James failed to contact his sister by Monday evening. The official search began on Tuesday morning, led by Sheriff Dale Reynolds of Mingo County, West Virginia. The search party included 12 experienced trackers, 3 K-9 units, and a helicopter with thermal imaging capabilities. Despite their efforts, no trace of James Mitchell was found during the initial 5-day search operation. The investigation took a puzzling turn on the 6th when rescue teams discovered James's abandoned campsite. The tent was still standing, though collapsed on one side. Inside, they found his journal, camera, and geological equipment. His wallet, phone, and keys were also present. The only items missing were James himself, his backpack, and his water bottle. Sheriff Reynolds noted in his report that there were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the campsite, and no indication that James had left in a hurry. The most baffling discovery came when investigators examined the camera's memory card. The final photograph, taken at 12:47 p.m. on the day James disappeared, showed a dense fog rolling through the trees. In the center of the image, barely visible through the mist, was a tall, dark figure that appeared to be walking away from the camera. The figure's proportions were abnormal, impossibly tall and thin, with limbs that seemed to bend at unnatural angles. The image was analyzed by photographic experts who concluded it was authentic and not digitally manipulated. This region had long been associated with strange tales and unexplained disappearances dating back to the early 1800s. Local legends spoke of the tall ones, shadowy entities that were said to dwell in the deepest parts of the forest, emerging only when the mists were thickest. The search for James Mitchell continued for another 2 weeks, with volunteers joining the official effort. Despite expanding the search radius to 50 square miles, no additional evidence was found. The case was officially reclassified from a missing person investigation to an unexplained disappearance on November 15, 2012. Sheriff Reynolds closed his report with the following statement. After exhaustive search efforts and extensive investigation, we have been unable to determine the fate of James Mitchell. In the years since James vanished, other hikers have reported similar experiences in Blackwood Forest. The strange humming sounds, the unusual silence, the feeling of being watched by unseen eyes. In 2015, a group of college students camping in the area claimed to have seen tall, thin figures moving through the trees at dusk. Their photographs, like James's, showed only shadows and mist, yet their terrified accounts matched the details of his final journal entries. The official search was officially suspended in December 2012, though the case file remains active with the Mingo County Sheriff's Department. James Mitchell has never been found, and no explanation has been offered for the strange circumstances surrounding his disappearance. The forest keeps its secrets, and the mists continue to carry whispers of what might have happened to the geologist who ventured too deep into its ancient heart. 2. It was November 5, 2014, when Officer David Miller began his shift at the McDowell County Communications Center in Welch, West Virginia. The center handled all emergency communications for the rural county, processing calls from police, fire, and ambulance services across the mountainous terrain. David had worked as a dispatcher for 7 years and was familiar with the peculiarities of the region's communication systems, which were often hampered by the challenging topography. The evening began like any other autumn night in Appalachia, cold, damp, and quiet. David handled routine calls: a minor traffic accident on Route 52, a reported domestic disturbance in the town of Eager, a request for medical assistance for an elderly resident having breathing difficulties. By 10:30 p.m., the dispatch center had settled into the relative calm that typically characterized weeknights in the small county. At precisely 11:17 p.m., something unusual occurred on Channel 9, the designated frequency used by the county's search and rescue teams. The channel, which had been silent for over an hour, suddenly crackled to life with a voice that would later become the subject of intense investigation and speculation. The voice, which was clearly male and speaking in a calm, measured tone, transmitted the following message. "They're watching from the ridge. Don't come up here." David immediately attempted to respond, asking for the caller's identification and location. There was no reply, only static. He checked the system logs, which showed that the transmission had originated from a location approximately 12 miles northeast of Welch, in an area known as Panther Ridge. The signal strength indicated it was being transmitted from a standard handheld radio, though the specific make and model could not be determined. 5 minutes later, at 11:22 p.m., the voice returned to Channel 9 with another transmission. "The lights are moving again. Same pattern as last night, yellow to blue to red." David again attempted to establish communication, but received no response. He notified the on-duty sheriff's deputy, requesting that someone check the Panther Ridge area for any signs of campers or hikers who might be in distress. The transmissions continued at irregular intervals throughout the night. At 12:05 a.m., the voice stated, "Found another footprint. Larger than any human I've ever seen. 3 toes, not 5. This was followed at 12:48 a.m. by, "Something just moved past my tent. It was tall, too tall. The moonlight caught it for just a second." By 1:30 a.m., David had contacted all registered campers and known hiking groups in the Panther Ridge area. None reported any problems or unusual encounters. The McDowell County Sheriff's Department dispatched 2 deputies to investigate. But the rough terrain and poor visibility made progress difficult. The deputies reached the base of Panther Ridge around 2:45 a.m., but were forced to halt their ascent due to dangerous conditions on the narrow mountain road. The final transmission from the unidentified voice came at 3:17 a.m. The message was brief and chilling. "They're here. I can hear them outside. The humming sound, it's the same as before." This was followed by what sounded like a struggle, then silence. David attempted for several minutes to re-establish contact, but Channel 9 remained quiet, except for the occasional crackle of static. When dawn broke, a full search party was assembled to investigate Panther Ridge. Led by Sheriff Robert Bailey, the team included 6 deputies, 3 members of the local search and rescue squad, and 2 tracking dogs. The party reached the ridge summit around 9:30 a.m., where they discovered a small campsite that appeared to have been recently abandoned. The tent was still standing, though the entrance flap was torn as if by something with considerable strength. Inside, investigators found a sleeping bag, a backpack with various camping supplies, and a journal. The journal belonged to Mark Thompson, a 42-year-old freelance photographer from Charleston who had been documenting Appalachian folklore for a book project. The final entry, dated November 4th, read, "Tonight I'll try to capture evidence of the Panther Ridge phenomena. The locals speak of strange lights and sounds in this area, dating back generations." Despite an extensive search of the surrounding area, no sign of Mark Thompson was found. The tracking dogs were unable to pick up a scent trail beyond the immediate campsite. Investigators did discover several unusual footprints around the tent impressions that measured approximately 18 inches in length and showed only 3 toes, as described in the radio transmissions. The footprints led away from the campsite toward the northern face of the ridge before disappearing at the edge of a steep cliff. The investigation into Mark Thompson's disappearance and the mysterious radio transmissions continued for several months. The communications center equipment was thoroughly examined by technical experts, who found no evidence of malfunction or tampering. The radio transmissions were analyzed by audio specialists, who confirmed the voice was human and not synthesized. Signal propagation tests demonstrated that the transmissions could only have originated from the Panther Ridge area, as David had initially determined. Perhaps most puzzling was the fact that Mark Thompson's name did not appear in any registry of campers or hikers for the Panther Ridge area. He had apparently not informed anyone of his specific plans, nor had he obtained the required permit for overnight camping in that section of the county forest. His wife, when contacted, confirmed that he had mentioned a photography trip to the southern part of the state, but had provided no details about his exact destination. The case of Mark Thompson remains officially unsolved, listed as a missing person investigation in the McDowell County Sheriff's Department records. The radio transmissions from that November night have never been explained, though various theories have been proposed. Some suggest that Mark was experiencing a psychological breakdown, possibly exacerbated by isolation and exhaustion. Others believe he may have encountered some unknown natural phenomenon that he misinterpreted as supernatural. Local residents, however, have their own explanations. Many who live near Panther Ridge speak of long-standing legends involving strange entities that are said to inhabit the remote mountain areas. These entities, sometimes called the Ridge Watchers or the Tall Ones, are described as tall, thin figures that move with unnatural speed and silence. According to folklore, these beings are territorial and resentful of human intrusion into their domain. The Communications Center in McDowell County continues to monitor Channel 9, though no transmissions similar to those of November 2014 have been reported since. Panther Ridge remains largely untouched by hikers and campers, who now avoid the area following the widely reported disappearance of Mark Thompson. The mountain stands silent, keeping its secrets hidden in the mists that frequently shroud its peaks, while the unanswered questions of that November night continue to haunt those who remember the mysterious voice that spoke of lights in the sky and footprints that defied explanation. 3. It was March 22, 2016, when Daniel Carter and his son Michael decided to explore the abandoned coal mine near their home in Harlan County, Kentucky. Daniel, a 48-year-old former miner who had been laid off when the local mine closed 3 years earlier, knew the area better than most. He had worked in various mines throughout eastern Kentucky for over 2 decades before the decline of the coal industry left him unemployed. The abandoned mine, which had been closed since the early 1970s, was located on property that had once belonged to Daniel's grandfather. The spring weather was unseasonably warm, with temperatures reaching the mid-60s despite the early date. Daniel and Michael, who was visiting during his college spring break, decided to take advantage of the pleasant day to explore the old mine entrance. Daniel had often spoken of his grandfather's stories about the mine, including tales of strange occurrences that had led to its premature closure. Michael, who was studying geology at the University of Kentucky, was particularly interested in seeing the mine's geological formations firsthand. They arrived at the mine entrance around 2:00 p.m. The opening, partially obscured by overgrown vegetation and accumulated debris, was dark and imposing. Daniel retrieved 2 powerful flashlights from his truck, along with a hard hat for each of them. As they prepared to enter the mine, Daniel noticed something unusual, a series of strange symbols carved into the wooden support beams flanking the entrance. The symbols, which appeared to be quite old, resembled nothing he had seen during his years as a miner. Grandpa always said these markings were a warning, Daniel told his son, running his fingers over the crude carvings. He claimed they were put there by the first miners to work this mountain, long before the company came. Michael photographed the symbols with his phone, noting their unusual patterns and the depth of the carvings, which suggested they had been made many years ago. The symbols consisted of various geometric shapes, triangles, spirals, and what appeared to be representations of tall, thin figures with elongated limbs. Unlike typical mining graffiti, these carvings showed no signs of paint or coloring, appearing only as deep indentations in the weathered wood. As they entered the mine, the air grew noticeably colder. The temperature dropped at least 15 degrees within the first 50 feet, creating an unnatural chill that seeped through their jackets. The mine shaft extended straight into the mountain for approximately 200 feet before branching off into multiple tunnels. Daniel led the way, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and revealing the support timbers that lined the passage. The first anomaly appeared after they had walked about 300 feet into the main tunnel. Michael noticed that the floor of the mine was covered with a fine, grayish powder that seemed to move slightly in the beam of his flashlight, almost as if it had a life of its own. Daniel knelt to examine the substance, rubbing it between his fingers. "That's not coal dust," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "And it's not rock dust either. Feels almost like..." Michael collected a sample of the strange powder in a small evidence bag he carried for his geological studies. As he sealed the bag, they both heard a sound coming from deeper within the mine, a faint scraping noise, like something being dragged across rock. Daniel instinctively moved his son behind him, shining his flashlight down the tunnel in the direction of the sound. "Probably just a rock settling," he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. They continued their exploration, moving cautiously down the main tunnel. The scraping sound had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that seemed to absorb the noise of their footsteps. As they progressed deeper into the mine, they noticed more of the strange symbols carved into the support beams, some fresh and recently made, others weathered with age. The newer carvings appeared identical to the older ones, suggesting that whoever was making them was replicating the original designs with precise accuracy. Approximately 600 feet from the entrance, they came to a junction where 3 tunnels branched off in different directions. The walls here were covered with a dark, moss-like substance that seemed to pulse with a faint bluish light. Daniel ran his gloved hand over the substance, noting its unusual texture, something between velvet and slime. Cool to the touch, despite the absence of any apparent moisture source. "I've never seen anything like this in 20 years of mining," Daniel said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was then that they saw a tall, thin figure moving at the far end of the left-hand tunnel. The entity, which was only visible for a few seconds before disappearing into the darkness, appeared to be at least 8 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and legs. Its movements were fluid and strangely graceful, unlike anything human. Michael managed to capture a single photograph of the figure with his phone, though the image was blurry and showed only a dark shape against the tunnel wall. The photograph, later analyzed by imaging experts at the University of Kentucky, was determined to be authentic and not digitally manipulated, though the nature of the captured figure remains unexplained. Father and son retreated immediately, moving as quickly as possible toward the mine entrance. As they made their way back, they became aware of a low humming sound that seemed to emanate from the walls of the tunnel. The sound grew progressively louder as they approached the entrance, reaching a crescendo just before they emerged into the afternoon sunlight. Once outside, they turned to look back at the mine entrance. To their astonishment, the symbols they had photographed earlier now appeared to glow with a faint, reddish light, though this effect lasted only for a few seconds before fading. The strange powder they had observed on the tunnel floor had somehow followed them out, forming a trail that extended from the mine entrance to where they now stood. Daniel reported the incident to the Harlan County Sheriff's Department the following day. Deputy Samuel Harris visited the site with Daniel and Michael, though he was initially skeptical of their account. Upon entering the mine, however, he discovered the same unusual powder and symbols described by the Carters. More disturbingly, he found fresh footprints in the powder prints that measured approximately 20 inches in length and showed only 3 toes, similar to those discovered in other Appalachian encounters with mysterious entities. The investigation was taken over by the Kentucky Department of Natural Resources, which has jurisdiction over abandoned mining operations. A team of geologists and mining engineers examined the site over a 2-week period, collecting samples of the unusual powder and the moss-like substance found on the tunnel walls. Laboratory analysis revealed that the powder contained elements not typically found in Kentucky coal mines, including trace amounts of minerals that are not native to the region. The moss-like substance proved even more puzzling. Microscopic examination showed that it was neither plant nor animal in nature, but some form of previously unknown organic material that appeared to possess bioluminescent properties. Attempts to culture the substance in laboratory conditions were unsuccessful, as it rapidly deteriorated when removed from the mine environment. During the investigation, several members of the research team reported experiencing strange phenomena inside the mine: unexplained cold spots, faint whispering sounds, and the feeling of being watched by unseen presences. One researcher claimed to have seen the tall figure described by Daniel and Michael, though no photographic evidence was captured during the official investigation. The mine was eventually sealed with concrete barriers and warning signs, though these measures proved ineffective at preventing further intrusions. Within 6 months, the barriers had been breached, and fresh symbols appeared on the newly installed supports. The decision was eventually made to completely collapse the mine entrance using controlled demolition, a process that was completed in January 2017. Daniel and Michael Carter never returned to the site, though both continue to struggle with questions about what they encountered that March afternoon. Michael, who has since graduated with a degree in geology, has dedicated part of his research to studying similar occurrences in abandoned mines throughout Appalachia. He has documented over 20 cases involving similar entities, strange symbols, and unexplained phenomena, though most remain officially unexplained. The sealed mine in Harlan County remains quiet now. Its dark tunnels collapsed and its mysteries buried beneath tons of rock and earth. Yet local residents continue to report strange occurrences in the area: unusual lights in the sky, tall figures moving through the forest at dusk, and the faint sound of humming coming from the ground where the mine once stood. The Appalachian Mountains keep their secrets well, and the shadows that dwell within them continue to defy explanation. 4. It was October 17, 2018, when graduate student Sarah Jenkins embarked on what would become her final field recording expedition in the Monongahela National Forest of West Virginia. Sarah, a 26-year-old pursuing her master's degree in folklore studies at Marshall University, was documenting traditional Appalachian ballads and oral histories for her thesis project. She had spent the previous 6 months traveling throughout the region, recording elderly residents as they shared songs and stories passed down through generations. The Monongahela National Forest, spanning nearly 1 million acres across the highlands of eastern West Virginia, was Sarah's final research destination. She had arranged to meet with several elderly residents of the remote community of Little Spruce, a small settlement nestled deep within the forest boundaries. The area, accessible only by a winding dirt road that followed the course of the Little Spruce River, had remained largely isolated from the outside world for generations. Sarah arrived at the forest entrance around 9:00 a.m. on a crisp autumn morning. The foliage was at peak color, painting the landscape in brilliant shades of red, orange, and gold. She checked her equipment: professional-grade audio recorders, backup batteries, and detailed maps of the area. Her plan was to spend 3 days in Little Spruce, recording as much material as possible before returning to Huntington to begin transcribing and analyzing her findings. The drive into the forest took nearly 2 hours, the narrow road winding through steep valleys and past abandoned homesteads. Sarah noted the increasing isolation as she progressed deeper into the forest, her cell phone signal fading completely after the first 30 miles. She passed only 2 other vehicles during the entire journey, both of them old pickup trucks driven by elderly men who nodded politely as they passed. Upon arriving in Little Spruce around 11:00 a.m., Sarah was immediately struck by the community's timeless quality. The small settlement consisted of approximately 20 structures, most of them log cabins or simple frame houses that appeared to have been built decades, if not centuries, earlier. There was no visible evidence of modern technology, no satellite dishes, no power lines, no telephone poles. The only sounds were the whisper of wind through the trees, the babble of the nearby river, and the distant call of a crow. Sarah's first appointment was with 87-year-old Martha Duncan, whose family had lived in the area for 6 generations. Martha's cabin, like the others in the community, was simple but well-maintained, with a stone chimney and a small garden where late-season vegetables still grew. Sarah set up her recording equipment on the wooden porch, explaining her project as Martha rocked slowly in a hand-carved chair. "I've been waiting for you," Martha said, her voice surprisingly clear and strong despite her advanced age. "My grandmother told me that someone would come one day to record the old songs." The recording session began around 11:30 a.m. Between songs, Martha shared stories about the history of the community and the legends that surrounded the forest. She spoke of the mountain people, mysterious entities said to live in the deepest parts of the forest, rarely seen but often heard. "They don't like being disturbed," Martha explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "They mostly keep to themselves, but sometimes they come near the settlement when they're curious. You can hear them at night, their footsteps, their strange language." Sarah made notes of these references to local folklore, though she initially dismissed them as typical Appalachian superstitions. She had encountered similar beliefs throughout her research and had learned to record them respectfully, without necessarily endorsing their authenticity. The recording session continued until 1:00 p.m., when Sarah packed up her equipment to visit her next interview subject. As she was leaving Martha's cabin, the elderly woman handed her a small leather-bound journal. "My grandmother's writings," Martha explained. "She documented many of the old songs and stories that aren't told anymore." Sarah thanked Martha and tucked the journal into her backpack, promising to return it after she had made copies. She then proceeded to the home of her next interview subject, 92-year-old Elijah Webb, who lived in a small cabin at the far edge of the settlement. The path to Elijah's home followed the river for approximately half a mile, passing through a dense stand of ancient hemlocks that blocked out much of the afternoon sunlight. As Sarah walked, she became aware of a strange sound, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the forest around her. The sound was barely audible at first, but grew progressively louder as she continued along the path. She paused several times, trying to identify the source of the noise, but could see nothing unusual. The forest appeared normal, with sunlight filtering through the canopy and small animals scurrying through the undergrowth. The humming continued intermittently throughout Sarah's visit with Elijah Webb. Like Martha Duncan, Elijah spoke of the mountain people, describing them as tall, thin beings who moved with unnatural silence and speed. He claimed they were not supernatural entities, but rather an unknown species of primate that had somehow remained undetected by mainstream science. "They've been here longer than us," Elijah explained, his voice raspy with age. "My great-grandfather was the first white man to settle this valley." He wrote about seeing them in his journal. Sarah recorded Elijah singing several ballads that were new to her, including one called The Mountain People's Song. which described encounters with the mysterious entities. The lyrics spoke of tall shadows moving through the trees, of strange lights in the night sky, and of visitors who ventured too deep into the forest and never returned. Elijah explained that the song had been passed down through generations of his family, though he admitted that few community members still remembered it. The recording session with Elijah concluded around 4:30 p.m. as daylight began to fade. Sarah packed up her equipment, thanking him for his time and knowledge. As she prepared to leave, Elijah offered her a piece of advice that would later prove prophetic. "Don't stay out after dark," he warned, his expression unusually serious. "And if you hear them calling your name, don't answer." Sarah promised to be careful, though she privately attributed the warning to the community's tradition of storytelling and superstition. She had spent enough time in rural Appalachia to understand that such beliefs were an integral part of the culture, even if they didn't align with modern scientific understanding. As she walked back toward her car, the forest seemed to grow darker and more oppressive. The sun had already disappeared behind the surrounding mountains, casting long shadows across the path. Sarah increased her pace, eager to reach the relative safety of her vehicle before nightfall completely enveloped the forest. It was then that she heard a voice calling her name from somewhere in the trees. The voice was faint but clear, distinctly feminine and eerily familiar. Sarah stopped, straining to see through the gathering darkness. There was no one visible, only the silent forest and the encroaching night. "Sarah," the voice called again, closer this time. Sarah's first instinct was to respond, but Elijah's warning suddenly echoed in her mind. She remained silent, continuing to walk quickly toward her car. The voice called her name 2 more times, each time sounding closer and more insistent. By the time Sarah reached her vehicle, her heart was pounding and her hands were trembling as she fumbled with the keys. She didn't look back as she drove away from Little Spruce, her tires kicking up dust on the narrow dirt road. In her rearview mirror, she thought she saw tall figures moving through the trees at the edge of the settlement, though the gathering darkness made it difficult to be certain. She didn't stop driving until she reached the main highway, nearly 30 miles from the forest entrance. Sarah returned to Huntington that evening, disturbed by her experience, but determined to complete her thesis project. She spent the next day transcribing and organizing her recordings, making particular note of the references to the mountain people. She also began reading Martha Duncan's journal, which contained detailed accounts of encounters with the mysterious entities spanning over a century. The following morning, Sarah attempted to listen to her recordings from the previous day. To her astonishment, she discovered that the files had been corrupted or erased, with the exception of a single segment recorded during her visit with Elijah Webb. This remaining recording contained not the ballads she had documented, but rather a series of strange sounds, whispers in an unknown language, the rhythmic humming she had heard in the forest, and what appeared to be the voice that had called her name, now clearly saying, "Come back, Sarah." Sarah reported the strange occurrences to her academic advisor, Dr. Robert Mitchell, who initially dismissed her concerns as technical glitches and overactive imagination. However, when Sarah played the remaining recording for him, Dr. Mitchell became visibly concerned. He contacted a colleague in the university's audio engineering department, who examined the recording and confirmed that it was authentic and not digitally manipulated. Further investigation revealed that Sarah's other recording equipment had also been compromised. The backup devices, which she had kept in her locked car during her visits with Martha and Elijah, contained only static. The only explanation was that someone or something had deliberately erased or corrupted the original recordings while leaving the mysterious message on the one remaining device. Sarah never returned to Little Spruce, and she abandoned her thesis project shortly thereafter. She left the university the following semester, citing personal reasons. The journal she had borrowed from Martha Duncan was never returned, despite several attempts by university officials to contact her about it. In the spring of 2019, a group of hikers discovered Sarah's car abandoned near the entrance to Monongahela National Forest. The vehicle was locked and appeared undamaged, though Sarah's wallet, phone, and other personal belongings were still inside. A search of the area revealed no sign of Sarah, who has not been seen or heard from since October 2018. The official investigation into Sarah Jenkins's disappearance has yielded few answers. The remaining audio recording, now in the possession of the West Virginia State Police, has been analyzed by numerous experts who have been unable to identify the language spoken by the mysterious voices. Some linguists have suggested that it may be an extremely rare dialect of an indigenous language, while others believe it may be entirely non-human in origin. Little Spruce remains isolated from the outside world, accessible only to those who know the unmarked roads that lead to it. The community continues to guard its secrets, and few outsiders have been welcomed since Sarah Jenkins's ill-fated visit. The forest surrounding the settlement remains silent, keeping its mysteries hidden beneath the ancient trees and in the dark hollows that have inspired countless tales of wonder and terror throughout Appalachian history. 5. It was June 12, 2015, when paranormal investigators Mark and Rebecca Thompson decided to spend the night in the famous Bell Witch Cave near Adams, Tennessee. Though technically just outside the Appalachian region, the cave and its associated legends were deeply connected to the folklore of the mountain communities that spanned the Tennessee-Kentucky border. Mark, a 35-year-old former police officer, and Rebecca, his 32-year-old wife, had been investigating paranormal phenomena for 7 years and had developed a reputation for their methodical and skeptical approach to supernatural claims. The Bell Witch Cave, a limestone formation extending approximately 500 feet into a hillside on the former Bell family property, was the site of one of America's most well-documented haunting cases. The legend dated back to the early 19th century, when the Bell family claimed to be tormented by an invisible entity that could speak, move objects, and physically assault family members. The entity, which became known as the Bell Witch, was said to have been responsible for the death of John Bell Sr. in 1820. Mark and Rebecca arrived at the cave around 4:00 p.m., giving themselves plenty of time to set up their equipment before darkness fell. The day was hot and humid, typical of early summer in Middle Tennessee. Thick clouds of insects hovered over the nearby creek, and the air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and vegetation. The cave entrance, partially concealed by ferns and other undergrowth, appeared as a dark gash in the hillside, emitting a constant flow of cool air that created a visible disturbance in the humid atmosphere. The couple had obtained special permission from the property owners to conduct an overnight investigation. Their equipment included multiple night vision cameras, electromagnetic field detectors, digital audio recorders, and thermal imaging devices. They also brought camping gear, planning to spend the entire night inside the cave rather than returning to their vehicle, which was parked approximately half a mile away at the visitor center. "We need to be completely isolated from any external influences," Mark explained to Rebecca as they organized their gear. "No lights, no sounds, no people." The cave entrance was approximately 10 feet high and 15 feet wide, narrowing quickly to a passage that required visitors to crouch or crawl. The temperature inside was noticeably cooler than outside, approximately 58 degrees Fahrenheit compared to the 85-degree heat of the afternoon. As they entered, Mark and Rebecca were immediately struck by the cave's acoustic properties. Even the smallest sounds, the drip of water, the rustle of their clothing, were amplified and echoed in the confined space. They set up their base camp approximately 100 feet from the entrance, in a small chamber that provided enough room for their equipment and sleeping bags. Mark positioned cameras at strategic locations throughout the cave, ensuring complete coverage of all accessible areas. Rebecca tested the audio recorders, noting the cave's natural resonance and the way sound seemed to travel in unusual patterns. The first anomaly appeared around 6:30 p.m. as the couple was finishing their equipment setup. Rebecca, who was adjusting a camera near the cave entrance, suddenly felt a cold spot, an area where the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees within a matter of seconds. Mark confirmed the temperature change with a thermal imaging device, which showed a distinct cold mass approximately 3 feet in diameter that seemed to move independently of air currents. "That's interesting," Mark noted, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. Air currents in caves are usually predictable, following established patterns. The cold spot remained visible for approximately 5 minutes before gradually dissipating. Mark documented the phenomenon with both video and thermal imaging, adding it to a growing list of unusual occurrences they had already observed. Faint whispering sounds that seemed to come from the cave walls, unexplained fluctuations in electromagnetic field readings, and the recurring feeling of being watched by unseen presences. As darkness fell outside, the couple settled in for a long night of observation. They had agreed to maintain silence except when necessary, using hand signals and written notes to communicate. The cave grew progressively darker as the last vestiges of daylight faded from the entrance, until only their small LED lights and the red glow of their camera indicators punctuated the blackness. The first significant event occurred around 10:17 p.m. Rebecca, who was monitoring the audio equipment, suddenly gestured to Mark, pointing to her headphones. Mark joined her, listening intently to what appeared to be a faint voice speaking in an unknown language. The voice was female and seemed to come from a passage leading deeper into the cave, beyond the area they had equipped with cameras. Mark whispered, though he already knew the answer. Rebecca shook her head, adjusting the audio controls to try to clarify the recording. The voice continued for approximately 3 minutes before fading into silence. The couple reviewed the recording multiple times, but were unable to identify the language or discern any recognizable words. Mark noted that the voice seemed to have an unusual cadence and tonal quality, unlike any human speech he had encountered. Around 11:45 p.m., they observed another phenomenon, small floating points of light that appeared near the cave ceiling. These lights, which were visible both to the naked eye and on their night vision cameras, moved in what appeared to be deliberate patterns, sometimes forming geometric shapes before dispersing again. The lights were not associated with any detectable heat signature, ruling out the possibility that they were bioluminescent insects or other natural phenomena. Mark documented the lights with both video and still photography, though the images proved somewhat disappointing. The lights appeared as small, blurred points of light that could potentially be explained as dust particles or moisture droplets reflecting their LED lights. However, the couple's direct observation suggested something more deliberate and organized. The most disturbing event of the night occurred around 2:30 a.m. Mark had just completed a routine equipment check when he noticed something unusual on the monitor connected to the camera positioned he had mounted near the cave entrance. The image showed what appeared to be a tall, thin figure standing just outside the cave, partially visible in the ambient light from the moon. "Van Sumain," Rebecca whispered, joining Mark at the monitor. The figure stood motionless for approximately 30 seconds, before moving away from the cave entrance and disappearing into the darkness. Mark immediately reviewed the recording, zooming in to enhance the image. The figure appeared to be at least 7 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and legs. Its movements were fluid, but somehow unnatural, unlike any human or animal they had ever observed. The couple decided to investigate, though both admitted to feeling considerable apprehension. Mark armed himself with a heavy flashlight, while Rebecca monitored the camera feeds. As Mark approached the cave entrance, he suddenly stopped, raising his hand to signal Rebecca. "There's something here," he said, his voice barely audible. Symbols carved into the rock just outside the entrance. Rebecca joined him at the entrance, examining the carvings with her flashlight. The symbols, which appeared to have been freshly made, consisted of various geometric shapes and patterns that neither of them recognized. Some resembled the symbols found in other Appalachian encounters with mysterious entities, while others appeared entirely unique. As they were examining the carvings, they both heard a sound from the darkness outside, a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The sound grew progressively louder, accompanied by what appeared to be faint whispering in the same unknown language they had heard earlier inside the cave. Mark and Rebecca retreated into the cave, securing the entrance with a portable gate they had brought for emergency situations. They spent the remainder of the night in a state of heightened alert, though no further phenomena were observed. As dawn broke, they emerged from the cave to find that the symbols had vanished from the rock face, leaving no trace that they had ever existed. The couple packed up their equipment and returned to their vehicle, both visibly shaken by their experiences. They reviewed their recordings during the drive back to their hotel in Nashville, confirming that they had captured substantial evidence of unusual phenomena. The audio recordings contained multiple instances of the unknown language, as well as unexplained knocking sounds and what appeared to be responses to questions they had posed during the investigation. Mark and Rebecca decided to submit their findings to the Tennessee Paranormal Research Society, an organization with which they had occasionally collaborated. The Society's board of directors reviewed their evidence over a 2-week period, concluding that the recordings and observations represented some of the most compelling paranormal evidence they had ever encountered. However, the investigation took a disturbing turn approximately 1 month after the Bell Witch Cave encounter. Mark and Rebecca began experiencing unusual phenomena in their home objects, moving on their own, unexplained sounds, and recurring nightmares that seemed to share common themes and imagery. Both reported dreaming of tall, thin figures standing at the foot of their bed, communicating telepathically in the same unknown language they had heard in the cave. The couple sought help from a clinical psychologist, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who specialized in trauma and stress-related disorders. Dr. Mitchell initially suggested that their experiences might be related to the psychological impact of their investigation, though she noted that both Mark and Rebecca appeared genuinely distressed, and their symptoms were consistent across multiple sessions. The situation escalated in September 2015, when Mark and Rebecca reported that they had awoken one night to find strange symbols carved into the wooden floor of their bedroom, symbols identical to those that they had observed outside the Bell Witch Cave. They also discovered that all of their electronic devices had been wiped clean, including their computers, phones, and the backup drives containing their paranormal investigation data. Fearing for their safety, the couple decided to leave their home and temporarily stay with relatives in another state. They abandoned their paranormal investigation work and have maintained a low profile since the 2015 incidents. Their former home was sold in early 2016, and the new owners have reported no unusual phenomena. The Bell Witch Cave remains open to tourists, though special permission is now required for overnight investigations. The property owners have implemented additional security measures following the Thompsons' experience, including motion-activated cameras and regular patrols of the area. No further reports of symbols or unusual phenomena have been documented since 2015. The case remains one of the most well-documented paranormal investigations in American history, though it has also generated considerable skepticism and criticism. Some researchers have suggested that Mark and Rebecca may have inadvertently triggered some dormant phenomenon through their investigation, while others believe they may have encountered an intelligent non-human entity that attached itself to them and followed them home. Whatever the explanation, the Bell Witch Cave encounter continues to fascinate paranormal researchers and skeptics alike, representing one of the few cases where substantial evidence was collected by experienced investigators using scientific methodology and equipment. 6. It was December 3, 2017, when dispatcher Brenda Collins received the call that would later become known as the Hollow Creek Incident in the official records of the Buchanan County, Virginia Sheriff's Department. Brenda, a 42-year-old mother of two, had worked as a 911 dispatcher for 11 years and had handled countless emergency situations ranging from minor accidents to serious crimes. Nothing in her experience, however, had prepared her for the call that came in at 9:47 p.m. on that cold winter night. The call began like any other emergency transmission. A man, later identified as 38-year-old park ranger Thomas Caldwell, reported that he was investigating unusual activity near the abandoned mining town of Hollow Creek in the remote western section of the county. The area, accessible only by a winding dirt road that followed the course of the creek for which it was named, had been abandoned since the 1960s when the last coal mine closed. "I'm responding to reports of strange lights in the sky," Thomas explained, his voice calm and professional. "Several residents of the nearby community have called in over the past hour describing unusual phenomena. I'm approximately 2 miles from the old town site now." Brenda logged the call at 9:48 p.m., noting the ranger's vehicle identification and last known GPS coordinates. She informed the on-duty deputy, Michael Reynolds, who was patrolling approximately 15 miles away. Given the remote location and poor road conditions, Deputy Reynolds estimated it would take him at least 45 minutes to reach the area. The next call from Thomas came in at 10:13 p.m. His voice now conveyed a sense of urgency and confusion that had been absent in his initial transmission. "I've reached the town site," he reported, his breathing slightly accelerated. "There's definitely something unusual happening here. Multiple lights moving through the trees. Not aircraft, not anything I can identify. They're organized." Brenda asked for additional details, though Thomas seemed to struggle to articulate what he was observing. He described the lights as pulsating orbs of various colors that moved with purpose and intelligence through the abandoned buildings and surrounding forest. He also mentioned hearing a low humming sound that seemed to emanate from the lights themselves. "I'm going to approach on foot," Thomas decided, "leaving my vehicle here." Brenda advised caution, reminding Thomas that backup was en route. He acknowledged her warning before signing off to begin his investigation on foot. Deputy Reynolds, who was listening to the transmission from his patrol car, requested that Brenda keep the line open for any further communications from Thomas. The next call came at 10:41 p.m. Thomas's voice was now clearly strained, and Brenda could hear what sounded like wind or static in the background. "I found something," he reported, his voice barely above a whisper. "Symbols carved into the side of the old school building. They're fresh." Thomas described the symbols as geometric patterns that resembled nothing he had seen before. Some incorporated what appeared to be representations of tall, thin figures with elongated limbs, while others consisted of complex interlocking shapes that seemed to shift and change when viewed from different angles. "I'm photographing them now," Thomas continued. "The lights are getting closer. I can hear them now, not just the humming, but something else. Voices, maybe?" Brenda urged Thomas to retreat to his vehicle and wait for backup, but he insisted on continuing his investigation. Deputy Reynolds, who was now approximately 10 miles from the location, requested permission to use his lights and siren, though the winding mountain road limited his speed to approximately 25 miles per hour. The final transmission from Thomas came at 11:17 p.m. The call began with what sounded like a struggle or scuffle, followed by Thomas's panicked voice shouting something unintelligible. Then, silence for approximately 30 seconds, broken only by static. Finally, a different voice spoke, a calm, measured voice that seemed to come from a great distance. "He has been taken for questioning," the voice stated, without emotion. "Do not attempt to follow. Do not attempt to find him." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Brenda in stunned silence. She immediately attempted to re-establish contact with Thomas, but received no response. Deputy Reynolds, who had heard the final transmission, requested immediate backup and additional resources for a search and rescue operation. Search teams were assembled and dispatched to the Hollow Creek area around midnight. The operation, led by Sheriff Daniel Williams, included 12 deputies, 4 members of the local search and rescue team, and 2 K-9 units. The teams reached the location around 1:30 a.m., where they discovered Thomas's abandoned patrol vehicle parked near the entrance to the abandoned town. The vehicle was undamaged and locked, with Thomas's service weapon, radio, and other equipment still inside. The only items missing were his flashlight, camera, and notebook, all of which he would likely have taken with him when continuing his investigation on foot. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, suggesting that Thomas had exited the vehicle in a hurry. The search teams proceeded into the abandoned town, spreading out to cover the approximately 20-acre site. The buildings, most of them constructed in the early 1900s, were in various states of decay, with some having collapsed entirely, while others remained standing, though precariously. The only light came from the team's flashlights, creating moving shadows that added to the eerie atmosphere of the deserted community. At 2:17 a.m., one of the search teams discovered the school building that Thomas had mentioned in his final transmission. The structure, a small wooden building with a bell tower, was one of the better preserved buildings in the town. On the side of the building facing the creek, investigators found the symbols Thomas had described, geometric carvings that appeared to have been made recently, as the exposed wood showed none of the weathering characteristic of the surrounding area. The search teams also discovered something unusual near the school building, a series of footprints that did not match any known footwear or animal track. The impressions measured approximately 16 inches in length and showed only 3 toes, similar to footprints documented in other Appalachian encounters with mysterious entities. The tracks led away from the school building toward the creek before disappearing at the water's edge. Despite an extensive search that continued until dawn, no sign of Thomas Caldwell was found. The K-9 units were unable to pick up a scent trail beyond the immediate area around the school building. The search was officially suspended at 6:30 a.m., though it was scheduled to resume later that morning with additional resources. The investigation into Thomas's disappearance took a puzzling turn later that day, when a team of forensic specialists examined the symbols carved into the school building. The carvings, which initially appeared to have been made with a knife or similar tool, showed microscopic evidence of having been created by some method that did not involve physical cutting. The wood fibers appeared to have been separated by some form of energy or vibration that left the surrounding material undisturbed. Further investigation revealed that the symbols contained mathematical patterns and relationships that were consistent with advanced principles of geometry and physics. Some researchers noted similarities to sacred geometry found in various ancient cultures around the world, while others suggested that the patterns might represent some form of communication or language. The search for Thomas Caldwell continued for 3 weeks, with volunteers joining the official effort. The search area was expanded to include the surrounding forest and creek, though no additional evidence was found. The case was officially reclassified from a missing person investigation to an unexplained disappearance on December 24, 2017. The Buchanan County Sheriff's Department consulted with various experts in an attempt to explain the strange circumstances surrounding Thomas's disappearance. UFO investigators suggested that the lights described by Thomas might represent extraterrestrial activity, while folklorists noted similarities between the symbols and those found in other Appalachian encounters with mysterious entities. Psychologists proposed that Thomas might have experienced a temporary psychotic episode, though his colleagues described him as mentally stable and reliable. The most compelling evidence came from an unexpected source, a group of amateur astronomers who had been observing the night sky from a location approximately 20 miles from Hollow Creek on the evening of Thomas's disappearance. They reported seeing unusual lights in the direction of the abandoned town, though they had initially dismissed them as atmospheric phenomena or military aircraft. When they learned of Thomas's disappearance, they provided their photographs and video recordings to the Sheriff's Department. The images showed multiple lights of various colors moving in what appeared to be deliberate patterns. The lights performed maneuvers that seemed to defy conventional aerodynamics, including sudden changes in direction and speed without apparent acceleration or deceleration. The astronomers confirmed that the objects were not satellites, aircraft, or any other known aerial phenomena. The investigation was officially closed in March 2018. Though the case file remains active with the Buchanan County Sheriff's Department. Thomas Caldwell has never been found, and no definitive explanation has been offered for the strange circumstances surrounding his disappearance. The abandoned town of Hollow Creek remains undisturbed, its silent buildings continuing to guard the secrets of what happened on that cold December night in 2017. Local residents continue to report unusual phenomena in the area, strange lights in the sky, mysterious symbols appearing on trees and buildings, and occasional sightings of tall, thin figures moving through the forest at dusk. The creek continues to flow through the abandoned town, its waters perhaps carrying away evidence that might otherwise explain what happened to the park ranger who ventured too deep into the mysteries of the Appalachian Mountains. 7. On April 22, 2019, wildlife biologist Dr. Eleanor Harding and her research assistant, Michael Chen, embarked on a 3-day expedition into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Eleanor, a seasoned 42-year-old professor, was studying the park's black bear population, while Michael, a 24-year-old graduate student, was conducting fieldwork for his master's thesis. Their destination was Deep Creek Valley, a remote section of the park notorious for its persistent fog and unpredictable weather. Surrounded by peaks over 6,000 feet, the valley's isolation made it a perfect, undisturbed habitat for their research. The expedition began under ideal conditions. Clear skies and mild temperatures provided excellent visibility as they hiked 8 miles to their base camp near a tributary of Deep Creek. They methodically set up their tents and equipment, their movements efficient and practiced. "The weather forecast looks good for the next few days," Eleanor noted, her voice a calm counterpoint to the wild surroundings. The first day of fieldwork was a complete success. By dusk, they had gathered a wealth of data that would keep their laboratory team busy for weeks. However, as evening set in, the weather began to change with a swiftness that defied their forecasts. Around 7:30 p.m., thick fog began to roll into the valley with unnatural speed. What started as thin wisps near the creek rapidly condensed into a dense blanket, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. The temperature dropped, creating a damp chill that penetrated their warmest clothing. "This came up faster than expected," Eleanor commented. Michael checked their satellite weather receiver, his brow furrowed. "Still showing clear skies," he reported, highlighting the disturbing discrepancy. The fog thickened, creating an eerie silence as it absorbed the usual sounds of the forest. With a growing sense of unease, they retreated to their tents. The first true anomaly appeared around 11:30 p.m. Michael, reviewing data on his laptop, was startled by a soft, rhythmic tapping sound that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. There was no breeze. The tapping continued for 10 minutes before ceasing abruptly. Curious and unnerved, he emerged to investigate, his flashlight beam cutting through the thick fog. He found nothing but trees and shadows, until he noticed a series of tracks in the soft earth near the creek. They were unlike any animal prints he had ever seen, measuring approximately 18 inches in length and showing only 3 toes, with a stride of over 6 feet. The tracks circled their campsite before retreating into the woods. Eleanor joined him, examining the tracks with her headlamp. As a biologist with over 20 years of field experience, she was familiar with virtually every animal native to the region. These, however, matched nothing she had ever encountered. "I have no explanation for this," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. They followed the tracks for 50 yards before losing them on rocky terrain. The fog had grown even thicker, creating a claustrophobic atmosphere. "We should stay in camp tonight," Eleanor decided, her expression unusually serious. They returned to their tents, but sleep was impossible. The forest, which had always felt like a second home to Eleanor, now seemed alien and threatening. Around 2:15 a.m., Eleanor was awakened by a low, guttural vocalization outside her tent, a sound combining a growl, a hum, and something vaguely resembling human speech. She lay perfectly still until it faded. Minutes later, she heard Michael's voice. "Eleanor, are you awake?" They emerged outside, the fog so thick they could barely see each other. "I heard something," Eleanor replied. "Footsteps, too," Michael added, his face pale. "Heavy, but muffled." They stood in silence, the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen presences pressing in on them. The decision to abandon the expedition was immediate. "We're leaving at first light," Eleanor stated, her voice firm. They spent the remainder of the night in a state of heightened alert. As dawn broke, the fog thinned slightly. While loading their packs, Eleanor noticed a series of symbols carved into the bark of a large oak tree, geometric patterns resembling nothing she had ever seen. "These weren't here yesterday," she said, her fingers tracing the fresh carvings. Some incorporated tall, thin figures with elongated limbs. "We need to go," Eleanor urged. They began the hike back, moving as quickly as the terrain and visibility would allow. The fog created a surreal atmosphere, and both felt the unsettling sensation of being followed. Approximately 2 miles in, they found additional tracks, identical to the first set. These tracks followed their path, always maintaining a distance of about 100 yards. Each time they stopped, fresh tracks would appear, indicating their unseen follower had also stopped. The fog, once merely inconvenient, now took on menacing qualities, providing cover for their stalker. They reached the park entrance around 11:30 a.m. As they emerged into the clear sunlight, they turned back. To their astonishment, the entire valley was completely free of fog, with visibility for miles. "That's impossible," Michael said, his voice filled with disbelief. The valley now appeared normal, bathed in sunlight and filled with the sounds of birds. They reported their experience to park rangers, who were initially skeptical. However, when rangers investigated their campsite, they found the symbols and several sets of the unusual tracks. The National Park Service took over, but no one could identify the animal responsible or explain the symbols. Eleanor and Michael underwent psychological evaluation and were found to be credible witnesses, though both exhibited symptoms of trauma and took leaves of absence from their work. The Deep Creek Valley area was temporarily closed, though it was reopened with no official explanation. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park continues to receive occasional reports of unusual phenomena in that area: strange symbols, unidentified tracks, and sightings of tall figures at dusk. Most are dismissed, but a few remain unexplained. The valley remains beautiful and inviting. Yet those who know what happened in the spring of 2019 understand that the Appalachian Mountains hold mysteries that defy scientific explanation, and that sometimes the fog brings with it things that are best left unseen. 8. On August 8, 2020, freelance journalist Emma Wilson arrived at a remote cabin in the mountains of eastern Kentucky. The 31-year-old former investigative reporter had rented the property in a narrow valley known locally as Black Snake Holler for a month-long writing retreat. Disillusioned with mainstream media, she sought the profound isolation the cabin promised to focus on her first book, a study of abandoned communities throughout the Appalachian region. The cabin, built in the 1930s and recently renovated, sat on 10 acres of forested land, miles from any neighbor, accessible only by a winding dirt track that became impassable in heavy rain. Emma arrived in the late afternoon, the hot, humid air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The initial tranquility was precisely what she had been seeking. After unpacking, she sat on the front porch to review her notes, the quiet broken only by the gurgle of a nearby creek and the song of birds in the trees. The setting felt perfect, a sanctuary from the world she had left behind. The first anomaly appeared around 5:30 p.m. As she prepared dinner, Emma thought she heard a voice calling her name from the forest behind the cabin. It was faint and indistinct, and she initially dismissed it as the wind. When she heard it again, more clearly this time, she stepped outside to investigate. The forest was a wall of mature hardwoods, shadows lengthening beneath the canopy. She called out, but received no response. The woods appeared empty, yet she was left with the unsettling and persistent feeling of being watched. She returned inside, though the feeling followed her, growing heavier as dusk approached. Around 7:45 p.m., a new sound emerged: a soft, rhythmic tapping on the porch outside the kitchen window. It was too deliberate to be a branch, especially in the still air. When she opened the front door to investigate, she found the porch empty. But on the wooden floorboards were a series of wet footprints, leading away from the door toward the forest. They were unlike any tracks she had ever seen, measuring approximately 16 inches in length and showing only 3 toes with a stride of over 5 feet. Emma's journalistic instincts took over. She retrieved her camera to photograph the prints. As she focused the lens, she heard the voice again, clearer this time, calling from the edge of the woods. "Emma," a female voice said with an urgent tone, "we need to talk to you." A primal caution held her back. Instead of responding, Emma retreated into the cabin, locking the door and closing the windows. The tapping resumed, now coming from multiple sides of the cabin, accompanied by whispers in an unknown language that seemed to seep through the walls. She moved through the small house, securing the windows, though she knew the old structure offered little real protection. Around 9:30 p.m., the situation escalated. The power suddenly went out, plunging the cabin into darkness. The circuit breakers were fine, but the cabin's backup generator, housed in a shed 50 yards away, remained silent. Her cell phone, which had a signal earlier, now showed none. The isolation she had sought was now absolute and terrifying. The tapping ceased abruptly at 10:15 p.m., replaced by a low, rhythmic humming that seemed to emanate from the forest itself. The sound grew louder as faint lights appeared between the trees. From behind the closed curtains, Emma watched as multiple orbs of various colors moved in deliberate patterns around the cabin. A silent, strange dance that lasted for 30 minutes before the lights faded. The humming diminished, but never fully disappeared. She spent the rest of the night in the darkness, listening to the unexplained sounds and straining to see movement in the blackness outside her windows. At dawn, Emma cautiously emerged. The generator was undisturbed, but refused to start. The strange footprints on the porch were still visible. More disturbingly, she discovered a series of symbols carved into the exterior walls of the cabin, geometric patterns and representations of tall, thin figures with elongated limbs that had not been there the day before. After photographing the symbols, her decision was made. She packed her belongings with a speed born of terror. As she loaded her car, she noticed a small pile of her own missing personal items, her favorite pen, a notebook, a family photograph arranged in a deliberate, almost ceremonial pattern near the tree line. She began the drive out of the holler, the dirt road now feeling treacherous and threatening. Approximately 2 miles from the cabin, she saw it. A tall, thin figure standing at the edge of the road. It was visible for only a few seconds before disappearing into the forest, but the image was seared into her memory. It was at least 8 feet tall, with disproportionately long arms and legs, and it moved with a fluid, strangely graceful motion that was not human. Emma accelerated, not stopping until she reached the main highway 10 miles away, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. She reported her experience to the local sheriff's department. Though initially skeptical, deputies who investigated the cabin later that day found the symbols and photographed the footprints, which the property owner confirmed were not present when Emma arrived. The Kentucky State Police took over the investigation. Experts analyzed the symbols and casts of the footprints, but they found no matches in the region's known species or any known human culture. Imaging experts confirmed that Emma's photograph of the tall figure was authentic and not digitally manipulated. The case was eventually classified as an unexplained phenomenon, with theories ranging from an elaborate hoax to an encounter with an unknown natural or supernatural force. Emma herself struggled to make sense of the experience, but remained convinced it was real. She abandoned her book project, needing to distance herself from the region. The cabin in Black Snake Holler remains available for rent, though the owner now requires guests to sign a waiver acknowledging the potential dangers of the remote area. Most visitors report uneventful stays, but a few have mentioned unusual sounds and sightings of tall figures at dusk. The holler itself continues to exist as it has for generations, isolated, beautiful, and mysterious. The creek still flows, and the mountains continue to guard their secrets, a testament to the fact that the Appalachian landscape holds mysteries that defy rational explanation, and that sometimes the isolation we seek can lead to encounters with things that are best left alone. The ancient mountains of Appalachia remain vast and unknowable, holding countless mysteries within their rolling hills and deep hollows. The accounts explored, though spanning different decades, share common threads woven into the region's folklore. Recurring elements emerge: tall, thin figures with unnatural proportions, strange symbols of unknown origin, mysterious lights in the sky, and the unsettling feeling of being watched by unseen presences. While skeptics might point to misidentifications, hoaxes, or psychological phenomena, the consistency of these credible accounts suggests something more is at play. The physical evidence and emotional impact on witnesses challenge simple dismissal. Perhaps the most unsettling aspect is not what might exist in these remote corners, but what these encounters reveal about the limits of our knowledge. The natural world still holds mysteries that defy our current scientific paradigms. For those who experience such phenomena, the encounter is transformative, irrevocably changing their worldview. This awareness, while frightening, also carries a certain beauty. It reminds us that the world still holds wonder and that our journey of discovery is far from complete. The Appalachian Mountains continue their silent vigil, holding secrets accumulated over millennia. If you have a true story to share, leave it in the comments below. Sharing these experiences contributes to our collective understanding of the profound mysteries that still surround us. Thank you for watching Sleepless Campfire. Until next time, stay safe out there.